with the Mayor of the Year of 2017 in Europe, Mayor Bart Somers from the city of Mechelen in Belgium. And I have to say, though, as a preface, in listening to the conversations all day, whether it was about retail, as we just heard, or disruption, or housing, or whatever the topics are, if you think about it, where does that all come together? It all comes together in cities. And so I'm going to suggest to you, you all have the wrong jobs. The very best job in the world is to be the mayor of your city. Because it's like a perfect job for people with attention deficit disorder. Because every 15 minutes, you're dealing with a different issue. Whether it's housing or crime or the technology or retail. And as we've had the conversation today, one of the other striking things, several of the comments made as to why we are in some ways the mess we're in the world today politically, with the United States and Trump, and here with Brexit, and in other countries in Europe. And in many ways, it is because we thought of the great cities of the world, London and New York, and as the centers of those cities. And in many places in America particularly, people rose up and said, well, what about us, the flyover places, the smaller cities that have had these incredible disruptions? And unlike, I was astounded by the suggestion that 50% of the Fortune 500 companies in the next 10 years are going to go out of business. That's an astounding statement. But think of it, cities in the same way. Cities don't disappear. There are not a lot of ghost towns, but they, in effect, shrink when they lose their factories, and it's huge disruption. So a challenge for a mayor is to think about where you position your city and how you do it, particularly in the world that we've heard about all day and the changes. And so it's an honor to be with Mayor Somers, and picked as Mayor of the Year because he swam against the crowd. He made a decision that his city was going to be a place that embraced immigration and made it easy and invited people to be part of the community. Unlike the conversation we're hearing all over the world where we want to build walls to immigrants, here is a mayor, and I'm sure it was controversial at the time, and so we want to hear a little bit about Mechelen, but then I don't want to hear about the good stuff. I want to hear about the controversies and how the leadership that you demonstrated really dealt with those controversies, and how you move people to embrace your vision of what a city ought to be. So, Mayor, why don't you tell us a little bit about Mechelen first?
To tell about my city, this is our beautiful cathedral. You see, I'm a mayor of the center of Europe. It's a rather small town, 90,000 inhabitants, only 25 kilometers north of Brussels. It's part of a bigger urban area, you could say, Antwerp, Brussels, 3 million. And what's special about this city is that in one generation it became super diverse. When I was a young kid, it was a monocultural city. In my classroom there were no migrant kids when I was in primary school. Today, 52% of the kids born in Mechelen have a foreign background. They come out of 138 different countries. 32% of the citizens of Mechelen have a migrant background, and more than 20% are Muslims. So it's a very diverse city. You can compare it sociologically with a bigger city. That makes my city also a little bit a laboratory for bigger ones. This was the image, and I'm happy you cannot understand Dutch. These are a few articles out newspapers in '99. I'm already 19 years mayor, so when I was still a young guy, just before I became mayor, it had a very bad reputation. It was a dirty city, it was an unsafe city, criminal rates were the highest, there was no social life, middle class left town, because the politicians had no answer for that changing reality of diversity. And what happened in my town, it was typically what you can see in a lot of Western European towns, where politicians don't find the right answer, and the city was really in despair at that moment. 1 out of 3 voters voted for an extreme right political party because the only thing they wanted an answer to was What will you do with the migration, the criminality, the link between it, and the middle class leaving town, poor people come in their place, we have a bad future, nothing works anymore. This is Mechelen now, only 15 years later. It's now the reference city in Belgium. The Financial Times says they do a comparison every 2 years of hundreds of cities in Europe, saying what's the best city of the future, where can you invest, and they work with categories. In my category, they say the best city on the European continent to invest in a smaller town, it's Mechelen. That's a complete changeover. Nowadays it's seen as a very dynamic city, a city where things go right. This is a mood board of what my city is nowadays. We have benchmarks in Belgium between cities. To give you a few examples, proudness. It was the lowest of all cities in Belgium 15 years ago. Now it's the second highest. Only Bruges, you know Bruges. It's not a real city, it's an open air museum. Only them are higher than Mechelen. So, and it grew a lot. Also, positive attitude towards different cultures. It was the lowest, now it's the highest. And you will say 35%, yeah, you have to know only 20% thinks negatively. Most people have no opinion about it. So the appreciation of people with a different background is growing very fast in my town. So it's a town where we found an answer to how to organize diversity, because I think the biggest challenge today in a lot of European cities is the migration issue and what to do with it and how to make a success of it. And that's what we try to do, and we did it with an out-of-the-box policy, with a mixture of policies that are often seen as incompatible with some classical right-wing things like being hard on crime, fighting crime, and left-wing solutions in being very inclusive. And with that approach, we could change the city completely, and we could make a success of diversity. Because it's my belief that those cities who can make a real success of diversity and make people citizens, those will be the cities of the future, because there will be the innovation, the creativity will be there. What put my city completely on the map was not only this makeover of the city in 15 years' time, but it was, of course, the drama of the foreign fighters, people who were joining ISIS. In Belgium, the number of people joining ISIS was the highest in percentage of all of Europe. Out of Antwerp, a city north of Mechelen, 100 people left to join it and became terrorists. Out of the south, in the south of Mechelen, Brussels, 200 people left, 200 youngsters, to join that totalitarian regime. A small town near Mechelen, only 5 kilometers away, Vilvoorde, 37 people joined ISIS. And out of my town, nobody. And so that was the start of the interest in my town. People wondered why. The Washington Post came, the New York Times, BBC, even the Chinese and Japanese television came to see what happened there in that small town. How did you do it? What happened there? And that was the start of also for us to rethink backwards, what did we do to make that success? And to say it in one phrase, and I'm really convinced of it, we recruited people for our society before extremists could recruit them for their alternatives. We made citizens of them, and if you can make a citizen of somebody, he will never attack the city he belongs to. So it was a very important thing, and you don't do it with one golden bullet or silver bullet. You have to make a strategy for years on it, but it's possible. And that's the reason why I think my city got too much interest, because we are too small to have to be here, in fact. But it's a story of hope in a time of populism, where everybody says it's a big problem we cannot cope with. I think we can make a success of it. We can be stronger, wealthier, better with the right policies and with the right approach, by looking to everybody as a real citizen and try to create a policy on that. That's my city, Tom.
And we talked earlier about your economy, and you've become a technology hub in a small city. How do you do that? You don't have a major university. You have a university. But do you see your embrace of diversity as part of the reason that people are coming to your city for technology?
Yeah, my city attracts a lot of young families coming out of Brussels and Antwerp. They want to leave those bigger cities, certainly Brussels, because there are a lot of social issues. And they prefer Mechelen because it's a clean city, it's a safe city. And it's at the same time, it's a microscopic big city because you have the multicultural diversity that also attracts young families. And because a lot of young people come there, middle-class people, educated people, industry follows. And companies come also to Mechelen. And you get in a kind of a spiral, positive spiral that strengthened my city through time. And we become, at the moment, we are rather wealthy.
Talk about the technology. What kind of technology economy have you seen being created in?
We have a history of making industry, still there is, but now we see a lot of biotech firms. For example, maybe the name Galapagos says something to somebody here in the room. It's a very big international biotech firm who puts its headquarters in Mechelen. And recently, Nipro, it's a Japanese multinational specialized in kidney disease instruments, put its headquarters for Europe, Africa, and the Middle East in Mechelen, and the CEO of that company, coming from Tokyo, said, we do it for two reasons, because you're the center of Europe, you saw it, we are the center of Europe, but secondly, and that was important, he said, we do it because your narrative and your approach of diversity, we want to be part of that, we want to invest in that. So for me as a mayor, for the first time, in times of populism, I could prove that a positive attitude towards diversity can create wealth, can create added value, can create jobs. And that's a very important thing in this time, that you can convince people of the positive side of it.
So tell us about the controversy now, not the good things. Mm-hmm. How hard was it for you to begin to do this, and the fact that you've won, what, four elections since, right? Yeah.
And last time with an absolute majority.
Right.
So how in the beginning, I have to start with the beginning, and the beginning is, if people don't feel safe and don't feel respected in the public domain, people will not cooperate. They will be angry, and they will be angry on the politicians because they don't do their job, and they will look for extreme alternatives. And they will be angry on the others in town, the migrants, because they are responsible for the decline. And they see a dirty city, so they have to point out somebody, and they are looking for who is to blame. So I had to start with that. And in the beginning, of course, they said, you're a right-wing politician, so you have to be against migrants, because people make that link emotionally. If you are for example, zero-tolerance policing in the beginning, it was the time of Giuliani, so I had a big example in New York, and I said, I'm the small Giuliani of Mechelen. They say he's a right-wing, maybe is he a fascist or not? Even that was used against me in the beginning. But I tried to explain that a policy of taking care of the public domain and taking care of crime is a social policy, because the public domain is the big equalizer in town. It's the essence of every city. It's the place where you meet the other people. So you have to take care of it. You have to make a nice and a beautiful public domain, and you have to take care of safety. And you have to do it because who is victim? Not the middle class neighborhoods. There is no drug dealer around in the middle class neighborhoods. It's in the poor neighborhoods, where you have to raise kids with gangs around you, with shops that sell stolen goods, where there is no rule of law, but the rule of the jungle. So fighting that was a social policy. I had to explain it. I had to also mobilize people in it. I tried to involve people, and I never made the mistake of turning my police against groups in society, because that's the danger. If you say we have we victimize groups because of they are migrants, for example, or they are Muslims or whatever, you cannot function like that. So that was the first thing. In the beginning, I was conceived as a right-wing politician. Now it's is a lefty, multiculti, because it's always about inclusiveness and equal chances. And then I have to explain, no, because I don't want to make the big mistake. I think the big mistake of politics of today, left and right-wing, is group thinking, is a communitarian agenda. We have too often the tendency of reducing people to one identity. And then we frame it. We put people in a box. And left-wing politicians do that because they want to see in every migrant a victim. Somebody who is a victim of racism or discrimination and doesn't have equal chances. And right-wing politicians do exactly the same. But they do it to identify them as abusers of the social system, for example, or people who causing trouble and crime. Right. And they both don't want to see the positive role models. And even in a small town as Mechelen, there are hundreds of positive role models. But they are not interested in because it doesn't fit in their narrative.
And the reality of housing and finding jobs for people, how did you mobilize your city to address some of that?
To create, I think, just to try to create a climate where people stop living in the past. It takes leadership, to be honest, to create also a climate of dynamism. We put a lot of public money in renovating our city, our monuments and so on. That was the start. Because we had to deconnect the idea that migration is decline. That's often in the minds of people. If there are a lot of migrants, there is decline. So we had to create progress. So we started in renewing the inner city, and they said, you're crazy, a 3/4 place at the same time, it will be a traffic jam. But it had to be a traffic jam, because people had to see that something was happening. So we created a little bit chaos.
And did you have to raise taxes to make those investments?
No, we reduced our other expenses.
You reduced it. You took the day-to-day expenses, reduced them to use it to invest in the future.
In the future and in the public domain. And then you see private companies follow. They are getting interested in what's happening there. You made noise. And then at a certain moment it starts working. And also your narrative is something people get proud of, you know. The fact, I speak a lot in my town about the fact that nobody of our kids left to Syria to fight. The narrative is we protected our kids against extremists, and we did it together. We all did it together. And that's also a very important thing. Also fighting the concept that at the one side you have the real Belgians, and they are like emperors with their thumb up or down to the migrants. And they can decide if you are integrated enough or not. In reality, the majority of those migrants are born and raised in my town. It's also their town. So I often say I'm the 15th generation citizen of Mechelen. My family is there since 1520. But I'm the first in a multicultural Mechelen. And I too have to integrate in that new reality. So integration is a part of human existence.
Very interesting attitude.
Yeah. And it's a part of our existence. I had to integrate in my role as a father. I had to integrate as a politician in social media, which is terrible. It eats me up every day, but I had to integrate it.
So there's a really analogous story in the U.S. There's a small city, Charleston, South Carolina, about the size of Mechelen. And as you know, we've had lots of shootings. And in this one, you might remember, a young boy, 21 years old, went into a African-American church and murdered 9 people while they were in church on a Wednesday evening. And the mayor of Charleston tells this story that he put together that evening 300, they had a phone tree, 300 of the leaders of the city came together and decided how to respond to all this. And in most American cities, when there have been a racially tinged shooting like that, there have been riots, and in Charleston there was nothing other than prayerful service. And when Joe Raleigh, who was the mayor, was asked, why did that happen? He says, people don't burn down the city they care about. And so they had worked for many, many years in building a community relationship with both the really rich people and the poor people. I noticed in one of our surveys that the issue of inequality, and that we're seeing that all over the world really, is that within cities we're separating out from those that can do well in the new economy and those that are not doing so well. And you're to be commended for recognizing that all has to come together. To go further, what we are seeing also all over is that cities are separating out. Is that there are cities that are positioning themselves to compete successfully, and where you are probably looking to invest, and where cities are not doing so well. And New York Times had an article just recently comparing Birmingham, Alabama, and Nashville, Tennessee, where the ULI Conference is this spring. And Nashville is doing very well. It's one of the really successful cities. If you're looking at the United States, you'd want to think about investing there. And it is really speaking to what you're talking about, that sense of leadership, of how you position your city, whether it's in the past or whether you're reaching for the future. So if I say to you, some of you have heard this, what is General Electric, McDonald's, Motorola, Caterpillar, Marriott, Kraft Foods all have in common? Anybody know? Other than if you heard me say this? what they all have in common in the last 3 years have all moved their headquarters from suburban office parks into downtown. So General Electric moved thousands of jobs from a wonderful suburban office park with thousands of parking spaces into downtown Boston with no parking spaces. And McDonald's is moving from an incredibly beautiful campus in suburban Chicago into downtown Chicago. Why are they all doing that? They're chasing talent. They're chasing young people who don't want to get in a car and drive for an hour and who want to live in a vibrant, exciting, what you were just describing, Mayor, a great placemaking kind of place. They want to live where there's restaurants and bars and entertainment and good recreational opportunities. We're watching this happen all over the world. Those kind of urbanization, the JLL guy mentioned it earlier about urbanization and that. So for cities to succeed, if I'm a real estate investor thinking about wanting to invest in a market, I'm looking for that leadership that gets that they need to think about the future, not just today. And that's what you've been doing.
Yeah. Maybe to add, maybe you heard of Richard Florida, The Rise of the Creative Class. It was a bestseller 15 years ago.
By the way, he lived in Pittsburgh. He criticized me for 12 years when I was mayor. Okay. And now he tells me Pittsburgh is the best example of what he wrote about, right?
So I still going to quote him. He says that the cities of the future are the cities who can attract creative talent. And he tried to explain that you need to create in your city places where people with different social and professional backgrounds can meet, because that is the places where creativity starts and where people want to be. But I want to go one step further, because I want to make a positive story about migration. I think people with a migrant background, they have different identities at the same time. And they have to puzzle with it, because sometimes it's conflicts, sometimes it's not easy, sometimes they hop from one to another. By the way, we all have different identities. I'm a European, Belgian, father, liberal, I like to read books, I don't like to go to soccer teams, events. So we have all different identities, and that makes links with people. But if you
don't want to go to soccer events because everybody's drinking, and even if they like you, you don't want to listen to them, right?
That's true. So those people with the migrant, they know how to work with different identities. If you bring people with that reality in a negative context, it's frustration all the time, because they are attacked for their different identities. But if you bring them in a positive attitude, in a positive environment, they are the most creative working forces. They create new things. And we see it, for example, we have a lot of cross-media startups. A lot of people with a migrant background work there, because they are creative on their own. And if you create a positive climate for it, those people will be really successful. And they are also the motors of social mobility, because that's also an important thing in a city. If you have a city where you don't see social mobility, it brings frustration. It brings negativity. But if you have a city where there's a lot of social mobility, you create a vibrant city that is very attractive for people to come to live there.
Right. Yeah. So we both come from what I would call flyover cities, and we were having a conversation earlier with some of the members, and somebody have raised this, is that Pittsburgh was a flyover city, and you're a small town, and we were talking about how the smaller cities and cities that were declining, old industrial cities, how do they turn around? And that's one of the big challenges of every country, is how do you bring cities that were something at one time, in a steel mill center or something, to something else now. And so what you've done is you use embracing diversity as one of the really, and getting control of your city in terms of investing in the future. Yeah. As mayor of Pittsburgh, we face the same challenge as our steel industries collapsed and our young people were leaving. How do you turn a city around? And for us, our universities and technology were the economic engines. What is remarkable for me is that you have a big technology economy and not a big university.
Yeah. But then you have to see the reality of Belgium. We are so small that, in fact, in 20 kilometers around, we have 3 good universities. So, in fact, we are part of a bigger urban area, you could say.
Right.
To go to Brussels by train is going with a metro to Brussels, in fact, out of my city. So that's that makes it even more challenging to do, because are you just a back street or are you also a hotspot? And we try to be the second.
So you've created your own identity is what you've done now.
Yeah, and that's, I think it's an important thing to create an own narrative. And you know, when I'm here, I will on social media say that I was invited even in London, and all the citizens of Mechelen say, wow, he's invited in London. That's good, we are doing a good job. And people speak about, we are doing a good job, and that's what you have to create in a town. Because then you can overcome, you have to know, 32% voted extreme right in my city, now less than 10%. So there was a very, very difficult attitude. So, and in time of populism, it's not always easy to for example, we are the only city in Belgium who, with the refugee crisis 2 years ago, we demanded from the federal government the opportunity to host refugees. And in my city council, they said, now he's becoming crazy. Why does he do that? So I said, that's what we are. We have to do that.
So let's talk about it. You sound like you're you're a fairly strong mayor. Is it by your rule of how you have mayor, or is it just because of your personality?
I think of my personality, but also of my historical conscience. I think we live now in a challenging time. I'm not saying using the word dangerous, but a challenging time. What I see in Europe disturbs me. When I see what's happening also in the States, it calls. I'm 54, I'm 19 years mayor, I've been in parliament, you could say take now a little bit more ease, but I feel more militant now, because we have to fight back against populism. We have to take back also the narrative about values. They steal our values and they turn it around to the opposite. So that's also a thing I want to fight for. A city cannot function without common values, but not abuse values. I often speak about Western Salafists. You know what they are? There are people who do exactly the same as the other Salafists. Salafists say the Holy Book is more important than the rule of law. The Western Salafists or populists say our traditions and habits are more important than the rule of law. There's a very beautiful book written by a Turkish writer, Atiyol. It's a Muslim case on liberalism. And I quote him, he says, liberalism, or a free society, open society, is not a way of life, it's tolerating different ways of life. And if you are working in a diverse city, that's something you have to be very conscious about. That people are trying to make from fundamental values like the freedom of speech, equality of men and women, which are very important, you may never give in on it, they try to bring in traditions, values, and they are trying to create what it has to be, what it means to be a good Belgian guy or a good European. But in fact, they are destroying our freedom, not protecting them. They are making a box where we have to be in. We cannot be free, we cannot choose for ourselves. They are dictating what we have to be. And that's the danger of populism. And we saw it in the history. So it's very important to stand up, not only politicians, but everybody. Everybody has a responsibility in society to fight against that idea. I always say in my town, if I describe my city sociologically, it's hellhole. It's the hellhole of Trump. I want to invite him to come and see. You know, Mr. Orban in Hungary, in my town there live 2 times as much Muslims as in the whole of Hungary. What's he making a problem about?
Is that right?
Yeah, he has 8,000. He has 8,000 Muslims. In my city, 16,000. And we are successful, we are more wealthy, we are safer, cleaner, and more prosperous than he is. So what are you making a fuss about?
Well, and we have great examples of people that rush to the lowest common denominator, our demagogues, right? And
Yeah.
I mean, what you're describing is that we live with it right now in the United States, right? Is that we face somebody who has demified really the opportunity. You've seen it as an opportunity. He's created it as a threat for us. And I come from a city, Pittsburgh, that did not have any, for 30 years had no immigration, because we were a failing economy and there was no reason to come because you wouldn't find work. Now, we are a city that embraces immigrants also. And it has been interesting to watch how powerful that immigrant population is in terms of creating a whole new economy for us. And that's what you opened up. Maybe you saw it, maybe you just hoped for it. There was a leap of faith for you, wasn't there?
Of course, but also, you know, it's also really believing in our values. We speak a lot about values, but do we really believe it? I really believe that in an open society that's based on the fundamental values, people will ultimately choose for it. because it creates more freedom, it creates more opportunity, it creates more prosperity. But we don't believe in it anymore. So if you take your basic fundamentals as your basis for your policy, you can do a lot. You can convince a lot of people, you can create more wealth, you can create more openness, you can create more social mobility. And I think that's an important, and you can attract investments, and a lot. And I feel that it's and the strange thing for me is that last 14 days, 3 capital cities came to visit Mechelen. Stockholm, Amsterdam and Berlin. So we are just the neighborhood of those cities, but they come and they want to understand. And why
That's
is it?
Great.
Because it's a story of optimism.
Are you spending time working with other small European cities?
Yeah, also, yeah. Sometimes I'm in Mechelen.
So I'm intrigued. So what you said, and sort of in passing, that we made investments so people wouldn't say the immigrants came, so this has gotten worse. So what were the kind of investments you were making? You said you didn't raise taxes, but you were able to shift money from your day-to-day operations to... So what are the kind of, that your historic citizens, they saw, wow, this is nicer than it used to be? What was it they saw?
The classical things you have to do in a city, library and things like that. But more important, we invested in the more poorer neighborhoods, in the public domain there, because we try to fight segregation and gentrification, because I think that's a real challenge. People who are progressive and open-minded often say diversity is a positive thing, but in reality, in our cities, we live in a kind of archipelago of monocultural islands. How many of us really have people with a different ethnic background, for example, in our direct environment? Not so often and not so much. So what we tried to do in our city was with very practical, offensive methods and ideas to break down segregation. And one of the things we did was investing in streets, in parks, and also in safety, in poorer neighborhoods. So middle class came back there. You could say, isn't there a danger of gentrification? Of course there is. But in Belgium, 75% of the people own their own house. It's a policy in my country that people would own their own house. So gentrification goes very slow in Belgium.
Did you help with first-time homebuyers, immigrants coming? Did you help them in any way to buy houses?
We supported them to be part of society. We helped them to learn the language, to be ready for the labor market, to bring out the right skills, to explain how our society works. We have creative projects like a buddy project, where 6 months long a citizen of Mechelen takes under his arm.
So you've organized all that?
Yeah, we organize. We put a lot of volunteer work also, because we think we have to mobilize society. It's not always the government has to pay it, and there is a lot of goodwill. People want to do something, but they don't know what exactly. So if you can organize that in a good way, people will help. People will be part of that story. And now, people say in Mechelen they say, Mayor, we are very good in integrating. I'm very good. Maybe he hasn't done anything, but in his mind it's changed. Now he's integrated. Before he was always negative. Now it's positive.
Have you been able to maintain integrated housing, or is it become segregated?
No, it's a very we are successful in that. Even in schools, you have a free choice in Belgium of schooling. And we had segregated schools. And what did we do? We made a program, and we invited, for example, in a neighborhood, 30 middle-class white families, and said, we understand why you don't want to send your kid to that school, because you are afraid of the quality of the school, and you are afraid that your kid will not feel at home in a school full of migrants. And you will say to me, Mayor, I'm progressive, but my child is not a social experiment. Right. So sorry, we don't. But then I say, if 30 of you send your kid the 1st of September to that school, it won't be alone. And together with the director, we will create a climate of ambition in that school. And we will try to get the layer higher. And it was successful. In 3 years' time, 3 schools were completely only migrant schools are now mixed schools. And those successes inspire, of course, new experiments to work on that. And so we did a lot of things like that. And always it starts with people saying to you, it won't work. It's not possible, you cannot do it. But then we see it works. We had the University of Leuven, which is the most important university, examining 3 neighborhoods in Mechelen, saying what happened there with middle class coming back. They said, you created unpaid social workers, because that middle class families, They organize the neighborhoods. They bring people together. They put the neighborhood on the political agenda. They come to complain to me that you don't do enough for it. But even small things like after school, in the middle class family, the kid has to make his homework and then he can play. But the mother will invite the poor family next door and bring the kid also inside and help him with math and give him also chocolate and an apple and help him to get his diploma. That's what you need in a city. That's the real essence of a city, where people with different backgrounds meet each other. And not only ethnical, but also social segregation is therefore something you have to try to fight on. And there, of course, people who build projects and so on can be very helpful in it. If you can create mixed projects where people, and of course not the extremes, they're not the very poor with the very rich, I also know, but there's a big group in between where you can really organize neighborhoods with. That makes a city really successful, and people like to live in a city like that. People don't like to live in a city where poor people are begging on the streets. Even middle-class people don't like it. They want solutions for that. So that's what we try to do.
So we've heard a moment of brightness, haven't we? In an otherwise pretty dismal. And what the mayor is talking about is humanity, of how we choose to treat people. And it is a remarkable testament, I think, what you've done. And it really ought to be a model that we use. How do we raise this up, this conversation, huh? Because if you looked at what people thought of as the most important issues for ULI, it was affordable housing, it was separation in our society. And what you're in your little city, you're building a system that is addressing those very issues that I think all of us are grappling with all over the world. So it has been a wonderful moment with you here. Thank you for sharing your story.
Thank you.
You have questions?
We have, on the level of neighborhoods, we bring people together. We discuss, we organize. We use the instrument of referenda a lot. That's exaggerated, but we use it sometimes. We try to involve people a lot with the town hall meetings. We do it nearly every evening around concrete projects we have. So we try to mobilize all the time society. And also when it's difficult, sometimes it's not a paradise, my city. There is still crime, there is poverty and so on. There are still difficult neighborhoods, so don't make a paradise of it. In my enthusiasm, maybe it sounds like that. But also there, we have to be, and of course in the size of my town, it's possible to do. And sometimes people say, yeah, but a bigger town, you cannot implement it. For example, Brussels. I strongly believe you can, because people always live in a neighborhood. They live in a big town, but they live also in a neighborhood. And it's on the level of neighborhoods, 20, 30,000 people, where you can organize interaction between the political responsibles and citizens. You can organize it very well there. And big cities offer more money to do it. So it's just a choice you have to make. Boris Johnson often has once said that London is a city of thousands small villages. So maybe that it's doable. But of course you have to interact, you have to listen, but you also have to convince. That's also, I think, a work of a politician, to take the city with you in a kind of direction. And fear is not a good thing in these days. People centrist politicians are often too afraid. I see myself as a centrist politician, liberal in the economical sense, and progressive in the societal sense. But people are often too afraid to stand up for the real. And you see, people who do that also in politics, they have success. Look what will happen in Poland, for example, with the new guy around the block there. He's very outspoken, he goes against the tide, and he can be successful, like Macron has done in France. Of course, after you have to deliver. That's also important to get re-elected. But I think that's doable. But I think interaction with people and also other actors in your society is a crucial thing.
And Chris, I think that's part of the big conversation, and if I'm a real estate investor, I would be looking at this closely, is that those cities that are willing to embrace the future. Cities are probably the most dinosaur-like places in the world in terms of being run like they were run in 1950. It's very difficult to change. But cities that are succeeding in America and all over the world are cities that are embracing a different way of thinking about themselves and the role they have. And certainly, and that's what interests about with the mayor of Mechelen, we intend to, in America, to have, cities tend to have much more freedom and to make individual choices regardless of the federal government or the state government. Here, I think you are much more under the umbrella of your federal government. Right, for better or for worse, right? And I think that's part of the distinguishing aspect of cities, is that cities that have the leadership, the public-private partnerships that are making choices really for the future are cities that I would want to be investing in. Thank you very much. Thank you for being a good audience.